Welcome to the video. This is just going to be a basic video on my biggest mistakes that I've made while training and how I'm addressing them moving forward. So, point number one is a powerlifting mindset for hypertrophy training. And I think that we can all agree that this is something that we've encountered in one way or another, whether it be having to do the big three squat, bench, deadlift, um, really manufacturing increases in weight when our technique is not where it should be for the weight that we're lifting, especially if we want to target a particular muscle in a particular way. And yeah, just training like a power lifter for bodybuilding is extremely common in conventional exercise wisdom. And this has been something that I've realized in myself fairly recently, is how I trained in the past was definitely powerlifting inspired. And it's not that, it's not that it's the worst way to train, like, oh, you can't train like a powerlifter, but you have to realize that powerlifting is a very specific sport. And, bodybuilding is kind of just whatever you make it out to be, especially if you're not like competing in any competitions or anything like that. You're just a recreational lifter and you just want to look good. It's very customizable. And I wish that that was something that I appreciated more at a younger age. I'm only 24, but I've been lifting, consistently now for 5 years. And it's definitely gotten me to a plateau. And, now I'm more oriented in fixing that plateau and really, getting to the next level of aesthetics. And, that involves a lot more isolations, and treating isolations like prime exercises for particular muscles. Or if you're using a compound like an overhead press that uses the shoulders as the primary mover. RDLs for hamstrings, thing compound movements, yes, but it's a lot different than just saying, oh, well, if you want big triceps, just get a big bench press. It doesn't actually work like that past the beginner stage. And, that's definitely something that I've fallen into. And, even speaking on the bench press, it's not the best exercise for chest hypertrophy. Yes, you can develop a really aesthetic chest if you get a big bench, but, it's kind of the cart, putting the cart before the horse. Your bench press strength is ultimately going to be limited by the size of your chest. So it actually is beneficial to train chest isolation, or at least, dumbbell presses. I love weighted dips. I think treating weighted calisthenics like the big three movements is something that has really been fun to do in the past and something that I definitely want to do moving forward. It's not in my programming right now. Right now, I'm geared towards building work capacity in a lot of movements, kind of just like starting from the ground up and building my training from a bodybuilding base, and kind of, not getting rid of the powerlifting base because I can't get rid of what I already worked up to build, but, kind of just starting from ground zero, training like a bodybuilder instead of using powerlifting principles to drive my training. That's something that is a huge debate or a topic of discussion right now with natural lifting in general. And, it's something that I've just fallen into, like I said, by the natural, conventional training wisdom of today. So that's number one. Number two is tailoring my training to accommodate life circumstances. And this can be summarized simply as an all or nothing approach. On any given month, my life right now is, I'm in a very like a transitory phase, both in like personal and like developmental state, the areas of my life. And So, you know, going from month to month, my schedule can be extremely busy, which means that I just have less time to allocate to the gym. But you know, this is kind of where like the powerlifting mindset comes in, is because if your main driver of hypertrophy in your worldview is purely strength, the numbers that you're lifting, then you're leaving so much hypertrophy on the table for every other muscle group that is, sorry about the dogs, every other muscle group that is not a prime mover in the bench, squat, or deadlift. And so, you know, a productive training session could be to train your forearms, could be to isolate your biceps and your triceps in an arm day. And, you know, if you're a power lifter, like a bro split is incomprehensible. You know, why would anybody ever do a bro split? But if you're a bodybuilder, you're like, man, if I can get a good arm workout done, I just train really hard. Maybe do a preacher curl, 1 or 2 sets close to failure. Some like dumbbell French press or cable French press or whatever, overhead extensions, and then do some forearm isolation. I can do that in like 30 to 45 minutes, and that's a really quality arm day. And so, you know, I think falling into that all or nothing approach where, you know, if I have an upper body day scheduled and I only have like maybe 30 to 45 minutes to train, maybe I could split it up and I could do chest exercises for 30 minutes, and then maybe later in the day or even tomorrow come back and do my back exercises. You know, that's still getting the same volume and the same stimulus, and it might even be better for hypertrophy doing it that way. So that way you're mitigating central nervous fatigue by training your entire upper body, and instead you're just training your chest or your lats or your mid back, you know. So, you know, I think it's very important for bodybuilding and just hypertrophy training in general is to understand your situation in life and allow that to dictate your training sessions and to dictate your volume. And, you know, not necessarily just subscribing automatically to a push-pull leg or to a full body or to an upper lower, which is something that I did and something that I'm finding out now is actually, you know, it's destroying my motivation to train because I feel like I'm subjugating myself arbitrarily to these boundaries, when in reality, you know, the way that I like to train is not necessarily subservient to conventional programs. And I'm not saying that conventional programs are inferior to my programming for where I'm at right now, but I'm just saying that it suits me better and it's more enjoyable and more interesting to train the way that I'm training. And, you know, if you're a beginner, you definitely want to just pick a split that you can do 3, 4, 6 days a week and just maximize that split. That's what I did, and it definitely carried me through the beginner stage and into the intermediate stage. But I think hanging out there is what gets a lot of people stuck, and it got me stuck in that intermediate plateau. So that kind of transitions well into number 3, which is program hopping and being bored of training. Now, this is kind of something that's ultimately inevitable, because if you do anything for long enough and it starts to lose its novelty and it starts to lose its luster, and it just becomes extremely repetitive. So there is an aspect of me simply just needing to discipline myself better, and just like if I subscribe to a program, just do it for 3 months and see where it gets you and analyze what you liked, what you didn't like, you know, what can I do better? How do I want to train moving forward? You know, what body parts are lagging now? And then tailoring the exercise selection to fit those wants and needs. But it's like anything else. There's ultimately going to be things that are necessary to do and things that you want to do. And if you want to get the best results, you need to do the things that are necessary. However, that doesn't mean that you completely throw the baby out with the bathwater and make your training unbearable, because then you're not going to stick with it. So it's ultimately a balance, which, you know, is good. Life needs balance between things that we want to do and things that we have to do. And, you know, going back to the powerlifting, you kind of have to do whatever is in your program, because otherwise you're not going to maximize the stimulus for your specific sport. But if you're a bodybuilder, you know, I can say, well, maybe I can put my chest on the back burner and really train my forearms. Why not? If I already have good chest development, I can just do like 1 or 2 presses a week. And as long as I'm maintaining a certain weight threshold, I'm not going to lose muscle, but I'm not going to build muscle. And I can allocate that energy now towards training other body parts that I've either neglected or that need to be trained. And it just makes training customizable. And I really appreciate that now in the current stage that I'm at with my lifting. So the last one is going to be training or using compound movements as isolation exercises. And what I mean by that is, like the example that I gave earlier, if you want big triceps, just get a big bench. Or, you know, if you want big biceps, just get really strong at pull-ups or chin-ups. And that's not necessarily the case beyond a certain point. At a certain point, you have to incorporate isolations, and then you have to train those isolations for certain muscles like prime movers and put those in the beginning of your workouts, either in the number 1 or the number 2 slot, because that if you want to drive muscle growth, you have to be fresh, both neurologically and muscularly. And so putting it at the beginning of your workout is going to ensure that you're firing on all cylinders from a neurological standpoint, and you can really push. And, you know, if you're like, for me, preacher curls are something that I'm really training hard at. So I'm putting that at the number 1 slot. And it might sound weird to put curls in the first exercise, and I train in supersets. So I'll do like a chest pressing variation and then superset it with preacher curls. And, you know, that's just what I need to do. And for me right now, it's fun because I love training preacher curls right now. And it's also ensuring that I'm getting the highest quality work in that movement that I'm putting at the top. And therefore, it makes it more necessary. You could put calves number 1. You could put forearms number 1. You can put rear delts number 1. John Meadows recommended training rear delts before any other in an upper body workout. You train your rear delts before you do your other movements. So yeah, ultimately, if I could sum this up, it's not being so rigid to conventional wisdom. And obviously that's just a lack of knowledge and experience. But, you know, I think once you train hard for like a year or two, really, like, the world is just your oyster at that point. You know, you just follow the basic principles of, if you want a muscle to grow, you got to train it hard. And like I said, ultimately your split and your training volume and your intensity should be subjugated to your life circumstances. If you're like working 80 hours a week and you have like 3 kids and you think that you're going to be able to maximize progress in a 3-hour bench pressing exercise workout, then, you know, that's just not very sustainable or even doable. But, you know, let's say all of a sudden you say, okay, well, you know, I want to get strong at the bench press, so I'm just going to train the bench press, and that's all I really have time to do. You know, if that's your goal, that's your goal. You know, I think that there's a lot to be said about customization and personalization for your training that goes unsaid by a lot of people online, because they feel like they have something to sell you and they want you to feel like your results rely on the information that they give you. And, you know, if I could just say one thing, it would be to just educate yourself, in not just in fitness, obviously you want to do that, but in life in general, because applied knowledge is power. Having knowledge isn't necessarily powerful, but it's how you apply the knowledge that you have. And so, you know, hopefully that you gain knowledge from this video and you understand, like it took me a long time to understand, that customization past a certain point, past the beginner stage, is actually necessary. Because, I mean, you can follow the same program forever, but, you know, that's going to ultimately really limit your gains, because you just can't train everything at the same time. There's only so much time and energy that we can allocate to training, to ensure that we send a good stimulus and then recover properly from that stimulus. But so anyways, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.